Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the JMO Podcast. I'm your host, Tayler Michels, and on this episode, we've got return guest Korey Sprengel. Korey's a professional walleye tournament angler, and it's safe to say that for the last decade or more, Korey's been a pioneer in the walleye industry, not just finishing high in most of the tournaments that he enters, but also working with companies to develop some of the most popular walleye baits in the industry. He sets his sights each year on the National Walleye Tour and has become the favorite angler to watch and learn from for so many in the industry. Any opportunity I get to get Korey on the phone and talk fishing, I jump at the chance, and that's exactly what this podcast is. Not that long ago, I found out that Korey was going to be driving down the road and he might have a little bit of windshield time, so I jumped at the chance to call him, talk a little bit of fishing, and that's what this podcast is. We're super lucky to have Korey on this week's podcast. Thank you so much for coming on, man. Have you been able to stay busy lately with all this weird Corona stuff and all the tournaments being shut down?
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of been a breath of fresh air for the springtime. Just the fact that usually I don't have much time at all to organize tackle and get things ready. It's kind of a mad rush in between shows and seminars and rigging a boat and then trying to get your tackle organized on top of it. So this year kind of used all this time to do things I wouldn't normally get to do if it was, build a deer stand on my deer hunting land, get that put together. I had bought it 4 years ago and just never had a chance to put it out, but I actually went through a lot of my tackle, pretty much everything, and reorganized everything, made it more modular to fit my truck so it's easy in, easy out, and just took this time to really dial things in that I normally didn't get a chance to do.
Well, do you have any like personal traditions for spring fishing? Any opener going out with your buddies kind of thing? What do you do in the spring?
I haven't had any, traditions for opening of fishing just because I honestly haven't fished a fishing opener in probably the last 8 years just because either I'm at a tournament practice, tournament somewhere, something going on. So ever since I started doing this back in 2012, I have not been home for a fishing opener. So, I haven't really been fishing a lot, like I said, trying to get a lot of other things done, but I took the time. Actually, me and my brother went out on Lake Puckway by us, and I just wanted to go out for a fishing opener and just kind of relax fish and, just kind of get back to something I haven't done in a long time, and I figured spending it with my brother was a good idea.
Man, that's cool. Did you guys catch any fish?
Yeah, we caught quite a few. We had unbelievable amount of pike and sheephead. They really started biting. The water warmed up to almost 60, but we had 3 nice walleyes, one up to 25 inches. Well, 3 legal walleyes, big 15-inch size limit there, but a lot of shorts. But it was just fun to get back out in the boat and do some trolling is what we were doing, and a little bit of casting.
Is this a point in time where you can get out in the boat and maybe do some practicing with a little less pressure, a little less responsibility with it? Is there are you working on stuff this time of year or primarily just going through tackle?
There's a lot of different things. I had just got my 2020 boat last week, so I was doing a lot of rigging on that the past week or so, the last few days. I actually stayed up last night pretty late. We were rigging the engines last night, so got those done. And actually this morning, I'm driving up to Chase Parsons' house. We're going to have a little get-together, have some meetings talking about some future plans. But after that, I have the boat behind me right now, and I'm going to be doing some fishing on Sturgeon Bay. And that's one of those things where smallmouth fishing up there, do a little bit of walleye fishing, I'm sure, too. But it's just, those smallmouth are a blast, but there's so much to learn. And especially on the bay, on Green Bay, when you're dealing with a lot of that cleaner water, I found myself fishing that bass tournament probably 6 years ago was maybe the first time I started. But something about this time of year up there with the clean water, there's definitely, depending on the area you're in, you can see bottom in 20 to 30 feet, depending on the conditions. And you can really understand what fish are relating to when you can catch them and obviously visually see them and see how they're relating to a transition or maybe one big boulder or if there's a little sand pocket. And I've learned so much from walleye fishing and bass fishing by fishing up there this time of year when you have that really clean water, and just see how fish interact when you can basically watch them like they're in an aquarium. So that's what I'm heading up to do, is experiment with a few things, look at some new places, and obviously number one thing is what I do is, traveling, competing is you can never stop learning because there's almost no secrets anymore, and you just have to be as most efficient and just stay on any, leading edge of any technique that's out there, and also just understanding, what fish relate to, because any of the main obvious, and if it's a brief point, whatever it may be, you're always trying to look for the smallest spot possible that guys are going to overlook. So when you can really put all the, pieces of the puzzle together and understand, what makes a spot special, it really makes a difference come tournament time.
So, talking about all these nuances and stuff, I mean, that's probably, I had a couple ideas when I knew that I was going to have a chance to talk to you, to pick your brain and just picking out a topic that we could fit into the time frame. Number one, not so much picking your brain about a specific nuance that, you're really well or proficient at. I mean, you do a lot of good seminars, great seminars. You represent your sponsors very well. If anybody has a chance to go listen to you in a seminar, absolutely do it, whether, with Sports Show or whatever. And even watching, the YouTube content, like you guys when you're on the Next Bite TV show, and you and Gary, Chase, and Keith, you guys, I mean, that's some of the best walleye fishing content out there. I mean, it's walleye content, multi-species, really. But that being said, those specific nuances, there's also another interesting angle about that I wanted to ask you about today, more so like kind of the method to the madness to get up to that point. How do you figure those things out? And so I guess my first big question for you here while we're driving is, what are some of the more difficult but also rewarding nuances to your tournament fishing career that you really had to learn and spend time learning? How did you figure that stuff out?
Starting first and foremost, it's no argument that time on the water is the most important thing, first off. Any given day, obviously, conditions change and things like that, so the more you're around it, and you're on the water and you see those things change, or, weather conditions and how it affects how you use a technique, obviously that's most important. But after that, getting into the main thing with, doesn't matter if it's panfish or if it's anything else, is really understanding how fish operate and what makes them happy and where they like to be. And most important tool we have to basically help level that playing field out with those fish or in any tournament situation is our electronics. And the more proficient you can be with your electronics, the more you can understand them. And then the more you understand them, generally the faster you can use them. And what I mean by that is, these electronics are very capable at, marking and finding fish, 20, 30, 40 miles an hour, depending on conditions. But so the faster you can, do all this, the faster this whole process of finding fish and then in return catching them. What I always tell people, especially my electronic seminars, is, let's face it, fish are generally a lot easier to catch when you're around a lot of them or enough of them, right? It's when you're not around many or any at all that they're hard to catch. And so that's where I really love to use electronics to help, basically speed up that curve. But after that, the main thing that I can look back on in tournament fishing is, once I knew that it was something I was going to do quite often, at that point I really didn't understand that it was going to be my living. It was just something I love to do. Is there's so many techniques out there, it's almost mind-boggling for walleyes, with everything that you can do. And obviously, growing up in Wisconsin, we can run multiple lines, 3 lines, so trolling was kind of a thing that I was very accustomed to around here. And so I did a lot of trolling. I kind of made my living trolling crawler harnesses. I just loved how I could basically manipulate crawler harnesses to change their depths. As they're out there, I can speed up. I can raise them up in the water column if I get shallower. And obviously, those speed changes triggers fish, unlike with a crankbait where you literally set it out there and that's kind of the depth it's going to run unless you have some sort of weight in front of it. And so the crawler harnesses were kind of my go-to, obviously casting, some pitching, but I did a lot of research, followed a lot of tournaments. I really understood on any tough condition, any, tough bite. If you were an excellent jig fisherman, pitching jigs, especially jigs, live bait, lightweight jigs and that sort, that you could be more consistent fisherman. You're always going to be able to put fish in the boat with that technique, especially on a really tough bite. And I look back at guys like Mike Goldfron, Tommy Kimos, a lot of guys that when I think of some of the best jig fishermen, that's who I think of. And so when I was starting out, on those, tournaments back in the day, I just knew that I was not the best at everything. I was good enough to get by on a lot of bodies of water, but I knew if I started going other places and I needed to be more versatile, I needed a lot of things I needed to work on. And I'd say the number one thing that I knew I needed to be the best at, like I said, was pitching a jig. And I know this one time in my career that everything came full circle, and I really gained a lot of confidence in myself. Is the hardest thing about pitching jigs is, reading the conditions, with the weather, the wind, and having obviously the right equipment helps with watch, because, more times than not, someone that grabs a jig that's maybe new to the, fishing or pitching jigs, you always want to try to feel everything. And once you can grasp your mind around that, feeling is basically the second thing you need to understand. It's basically a visual tactic. When you're watching your line as it has that bow in the line. If it's tight, also it hits bottom and it bounces slack. And once you can visually see that, you can, see things happen a lot faster than you generally feel them. And so I knew it was one of those things where, once again, time on the water was going to help me be more proficient at that. But it was in 2000, I think it was 14. It was the National Walleye Tour Championship at Lake Winnebago. It was a September tournament, mid-September. It had just dropped. The water temperature had just dropped about 15 degrees. It was like when it went from summer to fall instantly. We had a ton of rain. Lake Winnebago system got super muddy. Lake Winnebago is only 20 minutes from my house. It's not too far away. But it's one of those systems where it doesn't matter how much experience on it. It'll always throw you a curveball, and you basically have to go fish the conditions out there. So I knew going into that tournament, if you could catch 5 fish, no matter what the size they were going to be, it was a 3-day tournament, that more than likely you're going to be towards the top if you could get a limit every day. And so I knew right away, the fish just weren't chasing with that big temperature cool down. It was going to be a, fishing rock pile, shallow rock pile, just putting a jig in front of their face and hopefully getting 5 bites throughout the day. And I ended up starting that tournament fishing side by side with Tayler Michels. We were fishing the same rock pile, literally probably 30 yards apart at times, or I guess in the first hour. And we're pitching to the same little stretch. And, like I said before, Tommy is probably one of the best jig fishermen I know. And at this point, I am not one of the best jig fishermen that I'd ever consider anything, even with my buddies. And it's just one of those things where I put my time in, especially that whole week. I just made myself fish it. One thing I like to do is fish the lightest jig possible when I'm pitching jigs. If it's an 1/8 ounce, even if I drop down to a 1/16 ounce, just to basically allow that jig to swim through the water and hover as you basically lift it off the bottom and let it glide back, returning to bottom. It just gives those fish even more of a chance to hit it before it hits bottom. And what a light bait also does is that when that fish does go to eat it, most people think they just go and bite onto something. Well, more times than not, when that fish comes behind it, it just sucks the water in around that bait. So the lighter the bait is, the better they get it in their mouth. And so another reason why the lighter jigs are even better when it comes to pitching. And so I'm fishing side by side with Tayler Michels, and I was using a jig and a plastic, jig and a ringworm. It took me about an hour and 15 minutes, and I had my 5 fish. Now, granted, I thought it was going to take me all day to get my 5 fish. I didn't really know what I was getting into in that area. And I'm fishing side by side with Tommy, and I'd never seen him catch one fish. But I did see him go through multiple baits, changing things up. Obviously, I was getting in his head that I kept getting bites, and he wasn't. But I came into that day, and I believe I was in like the top 5 or so maybe. And Tommy ended up only coming up with 1 fish. And looking back at it that day, I was just like, well, that's pretty cool. I'll fish the dude that I consider one of the best for jig fishermen. And I ended up doing that 3 days in a row. Now, granted, it would take me till noon, 1 o'clock some days to get my fish. But looking back at it after winning the tournament, that was one of my weaknesses, was pitching a jig. I mean, it's an absolutely fun technique to do because there's nothing better than just feeling that thump of that, fish biting your jig and obviously setting the hook and knowing it's going to be there. And but looking back at it, that was one of those things that finally came full circle. It was a technique I recognized that was not a strong suit, kept spending time on the water, trying to understand every little thing down to the line, using a high-vis line so I can watch my line. And, really understanding, I guess, the whole technique and putting the time in and watch it come full circle to, to win the National Walleye Tour Championship was pretty special.
That is such a great story, man. And it's just, it's kind of inspiring too, where everybody out there, every single fisherman out there would be lying to themselves if they didn't say they had room to improve on, whether it's all the methods of fishing they do, or if it's, one that they're really just trying to work on. But you're talking about how you've evolved and developed your craft and mastered, some of these things to the point where you are now. How much of it for you in that aspect is more business related, or do you still really feel like fishing is your passion every day that you go out? How is it for you out there when you're out there developing these things?
So it's really a battle, I guess, all around the board, because to do this for a living, and a lot of people will look at either my jersey or my truck and say, oh, that's so awesome. You got all these companies, behind you, which is great. I mean, I love it. I do a lot of cool things, especially with Berkley. The product development side of things that I help them with is probably one of the coolest things I do. But at the same time, what I say is you have to remember every one of those logos is another boss that I need to keep happy. And so it's a juggling act between how much I want to fish, because I do have that passion, like you said, but I basically got to pull the reins back a lot and just try to stay caught up on, on emails, on activity reports. I'm doing a lot of seminars and shows in the spring and obligations, and just trying to keep up with social media. I mean, it's no secret that these days social media is the number one priority for a lot of anglers, that are trying to make it for a living. Is that's the biggest platform that we have for, reaching out to our anglers and obviously teaching people and helping with that interaction. And so it's a full-time deal. Then on top of it, rigging a boat and keeping your tackle right and making sure the truck's packed up to go from this tournament to that tournament. Because there's a lot of times when I leave, in usually the April or whenever our first tournament is, I expect to generally be gone for 2 months. Now, granted, I might come home for a night or two and to just stay home and maybe grab a thing or, restock the truck with whatever if I'm going from a bass to walleye. But I basically load my truck up to be gone for a long period of time. So the amount of organization and just making sure you have everything for those long trips on the road is, time that obviously is very valuable. And so I try not to actually fish as much as possible, because I know when I get somewhere, I'm going to be fishing every day. And I'll tell people this all the time. I literally don't walleye fish for fun very often, hardly at all anymore. I walleye fish when I have to, but the new passion that I have is fishing for bass, smallmouth, largemouth. I love fishing the lakes around me for largemouth, and that's what I really love to do, and also salmon fishing. And what I really like about that is, it's basically a new learning curve for me. I'm not the best bass fisherman. Have I won some bass tournaments? Yes, but it's just a new learning curve to me, which is fun. But what I can also do with those techniques, especially salmon fishing and bass fishing, is I can apply them to walleyes. I can basically freshen up my game a little bit. I get better at something in bass that's not necessarily a walleye technique. I can maybe cross it over a little bit. One thing about salmon fishing on the Great Lakes is you really start to understand how much currents there are and how those currents affect either water temperatures and how fish relate. And that was a huge point for me in my career, and why I was so successful on Green Bay and a lot of those tournaments, is understanding a lot of those currents to a point, but it's really amplified when you go salmon fishing out on the big lake and how all those things change. So that's what I've been doing a lot. And like I said, I wish I could fish every day. I still have fun with it, but at the same time, I'm one of these guys that likes to be super organized. And so that way, when I do get on the water, all my lines are ready. My baits that I want to use are already tied on there. So when I get out there, I can just fish, because once I get out there, I want to keep casting. I don't want to sit there and retie anything and, do whatever. So I'm one of these guys that'd rather take the time and sit at home and be prepared, get everything done, and then go fishing. So when I go fishing, it's basically mind-free of worrying about anything that I need to run home and get done.
The JMO Podcast is sponsored by Long Haul Trucking. Long Haul's always looking for more skilled professional CDL drivers to join their team. They're a people-first company, and it shows. Their employee-owned, asset-based fleet of over 350 Conestogas is among industry leaders in pay and benefits geared towards long-term success and growth for company drivers and owner-operators. If you're a professional driver or a company that wants to ship product with the best in the business, get a hold of Long Haul at 1-800-255-5153 or find them online at longhaultrucking.com. Long Haul, running on the power of promises kept. I got a question submitted from somebody here. What is your career lifetime win-loss record against John Hoyer in foosball?
Oh, yeah. Well, it depends on if he's on my team or not. I generally try to play foosball with John Hoyer next to me, not across from me. But if he's across from me, it's definitely 0 for the win category.
So,
definitely.
Yeah, that's what I heard. But there's also, you already alluded to it, there's kind of a, with you walleye guys, the saying, keep your friends close and your frenemies closer. It might ring true with this because it sounds like there might be a story about how you and John maybe teamed up and destroyed some unsuspecting competition.
Yeah, that's one of those things where I'm not a foosball player, and John won't come off as a foosball player until the money's on the table, and then he's all about it. Man, he's good. But yeah, definitely, there's been a couple instances that after tournaments, whatever, when you're hanging out and there's a foosball table there, and John makes sure that if he can talk anyone into putting some money down on foosball, that he makes sure he can take it. Just like he does in a lot of tournaments. But it's pretty fun. Obviously, John's a great guy. I got to spend quite a bit of time with them. I used to travel with those guys. John, I guess, be John's first year on tour, and also when he was at Coing there with Shimoda and Minky. So John's a good dude, and I'm pretty happy for him for all the success he's had, especially last year. And there will be a lot more to come from that guy for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was talking to him recently. That's where this all came from, obviously. But he paid you some huge compliments just in. In comparing, his career and just kind of using you as sort of a benchmark where, when you talk about milestones in your career, when you're as successful as you guys are in your craft, and you've been successful for quite a long time, John's enjoying, a nuclear bomb of success right now, but and you guys are great friends. That's no secret to anybody that knows you. But, I was asking him, and I'm going to ask you the same question. When you look back, what are some of the big milestones of your career that you remember? Maybe it's finishing high in a tournament, but maybe it's something a little bit more personal where, John talked about how when he was paying you a great compliment was that, when you see that Berkeley wrap boat drive by, you better be paying attention, right? I mean, if Korey Sprengel is fishing in the same area as you, you'd be a fool not to pay attention. But he never really felt of himself that way until, last year he was fishing a tournament and he saw a boat drive by, and as soon as they saw who it was, they kind of pulled in on him, and it was his first experience like that, where somebody was paying attention to him all of a sudden, and that can be just sort of a personal milestone, and it almost it changes your career. Now you got to treat things differently. How has that been for you in your career? What are some of the personal milestones like that you remember, in your career, even in the last 5 years in comparison to the first 5 years?
Yeah, I mean, first off, I'll talk about, like how John said, people start to recognize your boats, obviously, and, they take note of where you're fishing or what you're doing. And I've actually changed the way that I pre-fish and how I basically break down a body of water because of that. Let's face it, there's things that happen on the water that you wish didn't. But I've changed the way I fish and changed the way I pre-fish. But it kind of goes hand in hand and help me on how I do that. And the reason why I say that is the number one thing, I guess the biggest milestone in my career that made me more successful than anything, and it allowed me to adapt in a tournament, is probably getting back to a couple of my earlier wins. So I'd say 2012 when I won the FLW Tour in Escanaba. It was a multiple-day event. It was actually my first Pro-Am win But I gained a lot of confidence just because I changed up things during the tournament that I was not comfortable with. But, I know for one instance, I fished the whole tournament with crawler harnesses until I needed one more fish at the end. I could not get my last fifth bite on the last day of the top 10 cut day, and I just went after it, and I knew I could cover more water with crankbaits. I did have a little bit of success with crankbaits, and I literally put some crankbaits on and got my last fish. But I got out of the shell that I basically built around me with my practice, and basically the next tournament, the next year, actually happened twice. And I won 2 tournaments, 2013 for the National Walleye Tour. And on Red Wing, I did the same thing. I did not expect to fish an area after the way my practice went, but there was a stretch that was open. I got away from my game plan, and I fished this stretch, got 3 key bites that were 3 to 5 pound bites, ended up winning that tournament because of decisions that I made on the water, and basically started gaining confidence in myself that I could read the day on the water, because the most important thing that I feel anglers struggle with in tournaments is they only base their day going into a tournament on what happened previous in their practice and memories, whenever. And they don't take what is happening that day. And basically, just like any other day in practice, you go out there and you go after what you think that you should do. The weather's doing this, the current's that, watercolor, whatever it may be, you just go fish that day. Same thing, and the other one I won in 2013 was on Green Bay. Had a big weight. I don't know if I was late. I think I was in third after day 1 or something like that. Conditions were great for the area I fished. Day 2, I roll in there. I knew it was completely wrong. The winds had changed. The water had cooled down. Completely wrong. I did get 1 fish out of there. And then basically after that, I just got myself to calm down because I knew that it was going to take a lot of time to figure out the right area with the right temperature, the currents, and everything, the right recipe to hold on to a spot that might have some fish. And I basically took the next 2 hours to just drive around and dabble with some areas and figure out. And then once I found that right conditions, like I talked about earlier, it doesn't take long to catch them when you're in the right area where they are. And I got to where they were. Literally in an hour, I caught, I don't know what it was, 35 pounds or whatever, and ended up winning that tournament too. But what I'm getting to is I kept gaining in literally a matter of 1 year, from the end of in August of 2012 till basically July of 2013, and in that time frame I just talked about, I gained so much confidence in myself on the water, no matter if it was obviously a pre-fish day, but especially during a tournament, that, hey, this is just another day. Everything I took and gained in knowledge and practice is basically on the back burner. I'm going to take mental notes on maybe baits that worked and areas that the recipe to those spots on why they were so good or what was holding those fish, and I'm going to apply that on this day. Granted, it might be a different area, but I'm just going to go fishing. If the wind changed, if this changed, if there's, a key thing in a lot of our tournaments is we have too much boat pressure in a lot of spots. So you have to go read that on tournament day. If you got 15, 20 boats in a spot and you can't fish it effectively and share that many fish with people, obviously you got to rule that one off and instead of trying to compete with them. And so I started to gain more and more confidence. And like I said earlier, I really changed the way I practice. 1, because of that confidence. And 2, obviously I had a ton of success. People take mental note out of that. I could tell stories for days about, things that happened to me on the water that, obviously infuriated me, but there's nothing I can do about it. But it's one of those things where even that has helped me be even better fisherman on the water during a tournament, because now I spend so much time in my pre-fish, literally not trying to fish an area, not trying to spend much time in there just because, like I said, guys see it. But at the same time, I always say you do not need to catch any fish in practice. Maybe take a sampling of the size or 2 and just get some confidence in a bait or so. But what I'm really trying to do is learn every spot better than anyone else. And I'm using my electronics, especially side imaging and things like that, to really learn an area, like I said, better than anyone else. Another scenario is I won the Sturgeon Bay Bass Open last year, but the year before that I led it on day 1. But I knew this one stretch, when you get a fresh wave to pull in, there's more 6 and 7 pounders that get caught there than anywhere else. But it's a spot that you might be fishing 30 boats, but it's kind of a flat, but there's little depressions, sand pockets, high spots, all these things that make this flat, a little bit unique. And I basically mapped it out with waypoints and side imaging and a few other things. So I knew exactly when I caught a fish on where it came from. If it was a sand pocket, if it was a high spot, I'll never forget. We weighed 29 pounds something for 5 smallmouth up there on day one. And I was in this pack of boats just trying to feel it out. If a fresh wave of fish came in, I was basically picking my cast on where I was casting to. I casted to this one little sand pocket. I got a 5.5 pounder out of there, so hit spot lock. We took care of that fish. I knew exactly where that fish came from, so I could cast again. It took about 2 or 3 more casts. I got another 5 pounder out of it. Now, granted, this sand pocket's probably only about 10 feet wide. It's very small. And I told my partner, Adam Nye, at the time, I said, Adam, if you cast out a 45-degree angle out the back of the boat, I said, you're going to be able to hit this one boulder pile. It's the last boulder pile before it falls off into the deeper water. I said, I don't know if you're going to be able to reach it, but I said, if you make a long enough cast, I said, you should be able to get there. 3 casts in a row, he got snagged on it. I said, you just got to get just past it a little bit. His next cast, he hooks up with a 7-pounder. It was like just over 7 pounds. But basically called my shots, and I was in an area that was packed with boats. And literally you're kind of driving through boats and picking your cast on where you weren't right next to another boat. And so it was another one of those things where everything came full circle. Once again, I just fished the day on the water, and there's nothing more valuable than totally understanding when you roll into an area on those key spots. And it doesn't matter if you're just out jonesing around trying to find a bite. If you know those key areas and you do your homework ahead of time, and that's why I tell guys all the time, it doesn't matter if I go pre-fishing, I spend a day pre-fishing, and I know this area is probably not going to be worthwhile. It's not going to come into play for the tournament, but I'm still going to map every little thing out because there's going to be a time and place that maybe I'm going to need it next year, 2 years from now, or maybe the conditions change during the tournament. I can just run over there, and no one caught anything over there in practice, but now the conditions are right, but I already got my homework done. And if I can roll into those spots and know the number one high percentage area or 2 in that spot, I can start picking spots real fast and spending 5 minutes there, if it's 10 minutes there, and just hitting that high percentage spot. Once I get a bite, I can really slow down and work the area. But that's kind of in a nutshell, I guess my milestones is really gaining that confidence, and then all those other scenarios really help refine me as an angler in general, no matter if it's tournament fishing or if it's just fun fishing.
I tell you what, you probably get a lot of questions that like this that are related to your tournament career. But one thing before I was going to wrap this interview up, I wanted to think of a topic that I could hit you that maybe you haven't heard for a while. And knowing that you're a tournament guy and you pay your bills fishing during the daylight, where you're from, Beaver Dam, Wisconsin, there's a lot of, especially early in the year, there's a lot of fishing after dark for walleyes especially. And I think that there's a lot of participation in that throughout the Midwest, but there's also a big population of the anglers that have the big expensive boats and all the gear sitting there, but they're probably not taking advantage of, that after dark bite, throughout the Midwest. It's probably not as popular as it could be. So I figure I got Korey Sprengel on the line. I'm going to ask you about night fishing. Beaver Dam, Wisconsin, growing up, what experiences and stories can you tell me about fishing walleyes at night, and what tips and tricks do you got for me?
Yeah, like I said, with a lot of things, I haven't done much night fishing the recent years, but night fishing, absolutely, especially in springtime, cold water months, fall again. Generally, a lot of times when you have that cooler water, what happens is the water starts also cleaning up, and a lot of times walleyes will feed way more at night than any other time frame, especially when you're dealing with any kind of moon phase with a full moon, and that's another thing that really helped me learn on the importance of the moon and different time frames and bite windows and things like that. John Horry will talk about it for days about obviously being a musky fisherman on how much the moon affects fish, but it really gets amplified at night. And I used to do a ton of night trolling, night fishing. I ran up, 4 days a week sometimes up to the pier in by Green Bay on the Fox River there when I was younger out of high school and stuff. Did that all the time. Fished quite a few lakes around by me. I went up to Bay Denok a lot on the Great Lakes. And one thing about trolling at night, is obviously it does take, some of the right equipment. The number one thing is just having a good set of lights for your planer boards if you're going to be fishing at night. Just because, obviously, you don't want to be shining a light all the time. I used to put reflective tape on the boards and stuff, but having a nice light on those boards to really help watch them is really important. And another thing, a tip that I will tell you to do at night, it's definitely something not technique-wise, but it is very important. One thing that happens at night a lot is obviously it's dark. You can't always see everything. It is very important to wear safety glasses at night, especially when you're trolling. Just because, when those baits fly around out of fish's mouth when they get close, you generally don't see them coming and don't have time to react to them. And I've seen it so many times, it's almost happened to myself, where you take a bait to the face or in your hat or something like that. One thing that I like to do trolling at night, like I said, generally cool water months, is you can go unbelievably slow at night trolling. I've found many times, like I'm talking 0.7, 0.8 at times. And what I like to do generally, and you're dealing with especially cleaner water, bait colors can be very important, probably more important than they are during the day. For whatever reason, at night they seem to be very picky with colors, and it seems to be the more, I guess, muted colors, especially when you're dealing with water clarity. I'd say, if you can have any glass-style baits, the translucent ones with maybe a little bit of foil in them. You see a lot of these companies making those naked series that basically have nothing on them. Those baits are actually great night baits, especially in clean water. But a lot of purples and blues and things like that are great at night. There's kind of two different spectrums I like to do at night fishing. Is you have those translucent ones I talked about with very minimal color on them, maybe an accent here or there, a little chartreuse patch, pink, whatever it may be. The other way I like to do it is go the opposite, is have a dark bait, a dark purple, maybe it's black. Because what happens at night, especially when you deal with the moon, is those baits silhouette really good, especially in clean water when that fish is looking from the bottom up. And I think that's one thing a lot of people's misconception is we take and we look at a bait when we look at it in the water and we're looking from the top down. And a lot of times, or not a lot of times, majority of the time, the fish is looking at it the exact opposite. And so when it's looking from the top or from the bottom up, it's generally looking at a lighter or brighter colored sky. And I always say, what is a musky fisherman's generally number one topwater bait color? Pretty much all the topwater baits for musky fishing are black or of some dark variation. And that's because they silhouette really good. And it's the same thing with night fishing. Those dark baits can stand out big time when it comes to night trolling. But one of those things where obviously night fishing takes a little bit more patience because it can be frustrating at times because you just can't see what's going on the greatest. But it can be very rewarding. But getting back to the bite windows, I've literally remember spending nights out on a couple local lakes by me when I would get out there at 8, 9 at night. It was a fall time frame, and I would literally fish until 11 o'clock midnight and never had a bite. I think I remember one night I had one. And I was by myself, and the moonrise, it wasn't quite a full moon, but it was a moonrise, and the moonrise was going to be at around midnight, and it was about 11:30, 12 o'clock, right before the moon came up. I was fishing generally the same area, and I went from catching one fish in that many hours to probably caught 30 fish in the next 2 hours by myself. It just gets back to those bite windows. Those fish can be very picky at night when they do bite because they wait for the conditions to be right for them. Obviously, it's a lot easier for them to feed when they start getting a little bit of light, in their favor. And just one of those things where you can get very frustrated, but you can also pick your times when you do make those efforts to go out at night.
I tell you what, Corey, the walleye information never ceases to amaze with you. I've got one last closer here, so hopefully you're ready for this one. But I'm going to go back. A couple of years ago, you filmed an episode with The Next Bite. You're on the Mississippi River with Jason Shakir and Chase Parsons. You guys were casting cranks against wing dams, and I'm guessing you remember that episode. I hope you do, anyways, because it looked like you guys had a ton of fun. And I'm watching that thing, and I gotta say, the only thing that I could think of when I was watching that, and I went back and watched it again here before I called you, because it's a memory of mine. You guys just giggling in the boat, catching those nice fish, and I couldn't help but think about one of my favorite movies, The Hangover, when you've got Phil and Stu and Alan driving in the Mercedes, and Alan is in the back seat singing about how we're the three best friends that anyone could have,
Yeah.
and and so I'm gonna ask you, between you three in the boat that day, who's the Phil, who's the Stu, and who's the Alan?
Well, Chase, no doubt, is Alan. Not a question of that one. And I mean, there's a lot of people that make comments and things why there's so much laughing in the boat, and why Chase is laughing all the time. And I always tell people, I mean, if you only knew some of the things that we were saying to each other or the topics we were talking about, I mean, we all get along so great. And let's face it, a lot of us that do it for a living, it's very stressful at times. So we love to just pry on each other, give each other a little bit of crap when we can, and just lighten the mood up all the time. So it's just nonstop, no matter who you are. And especially me being the young guy for how many years, I mean, they rode me hard for a long time. So I basically learned that if I'm not on offense, I'm just getting walked all over. So I got to stay on top of my game and give it every second I can, because as soon as I stop, they're getting up on me. But I would definitely say Chase is Alan. I guess it'd be a toss-up on Jason and me. I mean, Jason is, the quiet guy, but he's everything. When he does speak, it's for a reason. He's direct and to the point. So it kind of be, honestly, I'm not sure between me and Jason, because they're kind of very similar. Besides, he's a little more reserved than I guess I am. But I definitely would have to say Chase is Alan for sure.
That is funny, man. That's good. But no, it's great to see you guys, kind of out of that tournament format, enjoying each other's company in the boat and fishing, because it's just good for people to see, and people are going to learn so much from you guys, and it's so great for the industry when you guys are able to get along, when you're not competing for that big check, where you can take the time to fish and just really inspire people to get out there and get better at it, or do it for the first time. But Korey, man, if there's anything else you want to add, go for it, man. But I'm super, super happy to be able to have this time with you, and hopefully we can connect down the road sometime.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. I mean, the only thing like that is, I'm ready to fish. Like I said, I've done enough work now. The weather's finally starting to turn a little bit. I'm ready to get out on the water, like obviously the majority of the rest of us are, and just looking at putting, all this things we have going on right now in our country and in the world behind us, and get back to, I guess, more of a normalcy, and, get back to having fun, enjoying the camaraderie with all the anglers and fans and whoever it may be, is what I kind of look forward to. As like I've said many times, I don't know what I miss right now more is competing in the tournaments and, having that rush and, thrill of breaking down a body of water, or just, hanging around the guys, being around the people in our sport, is probably one of the most important things that I miss. Is, there's a great group of guys all the way around the board from our tournament circuit, people that work for that, and all the sponsors that we have, and interacting with all our fans. And I'm ready for things to get back to more of a normalcy, and I'm looking forward to this year.
Yeah, man, I hope there's some light at the end of the tunnel here coming soon. And it's, for you guys specifically, the first two stops of the NWT at this point, while we're talking, have been canceled, and they're still trying to decide, from the sounds of it, maybe you know more, but it sounds like they're hoping to add a stop in August, kind of between that Green Bay tournament and what was scheduled to be the championship on Lake Sakakawea. Is that right?
Yep, they're definitely, the National Wine Tour is reaching out at other stops. I know they got a couple other communities that they've been talking to on adding and replacing a couple stops that have obviously got canceled. So they'll definitely, at this point, we're going forward with this season, unless obviously other things change. But they'll just keep, moving it back to when obviously it's right and I guess more politically correct to travel around and, get back to more normalcy. And even if it means we have to fish in October or later. And so they're obviously giving their best effort, trying to work around all the guidelines and recommendations and things like that to make things a little bit different, to do whatever we have to do to get through the season.
Yeah, and when we do reach that point and you guys are out there competing in a tournament, that's going to mean that everything else is doing better too. So it'll be full circle for everything when that shows up. Well, anyway, safe travels, Korey, man. Say hi to Chase when you get there, and yeah, we'll keep checking you up on Instagram to see what you're up to.
All right, I appreciate the call. Talk to you soon.
All right, later, Korey. And thanks everybody else for following along on another episode of the podcast. You can look us up on Instagram or Facebook at Jason Mitchell Outdoors. If you got any ideas for topics or guests on an upcoming episode, let us know there. And if you're checking in on YouTube, Spotify, Stitcher, or Apple Podcasts, make sure you hit the subscribe button and share with all your friends.